Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming together tonight, November 4th, to meet and discuss the Walnut Lane development scenarios with Caitlin Myers, our Senior Project Manager. I just want to start the meeting by reminding Council that this is for discussion and an informal approval to proceed to Caitlin. And I also want to just reiterate that after we do a roll call, what our meeting goals will be. So to roll call, I'll go ahead and take us through it. So myself, Mayor Emily Niehaus, Ronnie DeRessery, Moab City Council, Tani Knudsen-Boyd, Moab City Council, Kaylin Jones, Moab City Council, Mike Duncan, Moab City Council, Karen Guzman-Newton, Moab City Council, Laurie Simonson, our City Attorney, Caitlin Myers, again, Senior Project Manager, Joel Linares, our City Manager, Carly Castle, our Assistant City Manager, and Summer Johnson, our Recorder. And very quickly, our meeting goals. Staff would like to get consensus from Council on the following items at this meeting. With which option would Council like to proceed to phase the project? How does Council wish to proceed with modular versus site-built units in each phase? And how would Council like to proceed with the IFB results? If Council wishes to proceed with a bid, staff will prepare materials to discuss and take action on this item at the November 10 meeting. I just wanted to frame that so that we're all efficient and effective with our time. Caitlin, thank you. And thanks for everybody for joining for a special meeting on a not council night. Caitlin, take it away.
Thanks, Mayor. And thank you for reminding us of our goals. I know we have a lot to talk about tonight, so I'm just going to share my screen and we can toggle through PDFs and Excels rather than going through a PowerPoint. And also just want to double check with Summer that we have enough time if Council decides via informal approval that we can get contract approval on the agenda next week.
Depends on when you get your information to me.
Great. Okay. Okay, well, I'm going to start by sharing my screen and kind of jump in and focus this conversation first on phasing approaches, because that's kind of how we've set up the rest of the conversation in terms of the timeline and the pro forma. So just walking through really quickly, this is option A, which was included in your packet. So the difference between option A and option B have the same phase one, which is starting off with 8 duplexes in the southeast corner of the site. These duplexes, as we've recommended, as our selection committee has recommended in the past, these duplexes are about the size, and all of the numbers and timeline and all that stuff for these duplexes are using the IndyDwell bid. So if Council prefers to proceed with a different bid, this specific information about this phase would change, but this is still, regardless of how Council wants to proceed with a bid, this would be our starting place with 8 units. And then proceeding to phase one, and I don't know if it's helpful for me to go through the pros and cons, but just briefly, this has always been the starting place that we've talked about for this project, partially and mostly because we've cleared out the most units from this just naturally with people vacating, so it makes the most sense to start there. And so we have one current tenant there that we'll have to relocate during this process, but otherwise this is the least invasive place to start. So moving on to phase 2 of this option, we had talked about, I guess for context, we had talked as a team about proceeding with option B first, but I'm presenting this as option A because this is the option that our team is recommending that we start with, rather than option B, but just to give a little bit of context. So in phase 2, we're proposing that we do a 3-story apartment building for 24 units, which has always been included in the master plan from Architectural Squared. And we just change around the phasing a little bit. And the main reason for this is so that it makes a little bit more sense in terms of relocating residents over time as we're phasing this. So since this is 8 units, we have 7 occupied trailers here. We'll be able to relocate the person that's in this trailer right now into the 8 units, and then relocate the 7 other tenants into the 8 units. So we'll pretty easily be able to clear out this site, and it'll be a little less invasive to do some of the construction, since we have so many tenants living in the northern half of the site. So that's definitely one of the major pros of this approach. It's more efficient. We'll be able to get everyone that's currently living on the site into new housing as quickly as possible, and then we'll be able to clear out the back half of the site to have a more clean space for development. We are also talking about, in phase 2, putting in a lot of the major infrastructure. So I don't have as much detail on the logistics for that, but just in terms of timing and phasing, that's when we're talking about it, because we'll be bringing in, this new apartment building, which will need more infrastructure. So kind of keeping that as in mind as we go forward. But, last phase of this is kind of finishing out that back half, and we'll be able to do that in, hopefully in one fell swoop. And so I think that this is the easiest and most efficient way to build out the site, but we wanted to present an option B, with the first phase being the same, and then kind of switching up the phasing a little bit in the second phase, so that rather than building out the southern half first, we're moving counterclockwise through the site. This has kind of been how we had been thinking about phasing the site for a long time. And so we wanted to keep that option. I think that it provides more unit mixes, which will serve a greater mix of the tenants that are out there, and will be a little bit more density in that second phase than, well, actually it's not actually. So it's greater unit types, but 22 units versus 24 units. And then, kind of continuing along that loop, we would put in the 2-story apartment buildings in the third phase. So, that's a brief overview of the 2 options. And then we've kind of focused the timeline and the pro forma on, option A or option B. So let me zoom in a little bit more. Also, if at any time my screen is too small, please just let me know and I can zoom in.
I don't know if, this one, I thought when I was looking at the materials, this might be a hard one, but actually it looks pretty good.
Yeah, so this one is a little bit hard to get it all on one screen, but as we're at right now, 2020, going into 2021, partially because we've had to take a little bit more time due to COVID and figuring out some other options for this project. The master planning itself is, taking a little bit longer than our initial schedule with Architectural Squared. So I do want to kind of bring that up as a reminder to council that, we do have a contract and want to continue to move forward with this site plan. But, so looking at phase 1, either way, we'll kind of be continuing to work on the site plan concurrently with phase 1 if council decides to award bid. And so either way, for phase 1, we're estimating that that'll be done sometime by spring 2021, whether that's modular or manufactured. And then we'll continue to go through site plan, building permits, all that stuff, finish the site plan in 2021 so that we can proceed to phase 2 and 3. And with, option A, the timeline is a little bit shorter than option B, partially because, with option A, the apartment, just kind of the way the phasing is, especially with the way the apartments would be developed, the timeline just kind of broke out a little bit differently. So either way, we're looking at kind of a 2025 conclusion, to have this project totally wrapped up. So just kind of in the context of modular versus site built, modular will take less time, especially specifically constructing on the site. But, in talking to the architectural squared team, for example, that would it still takes a lot of time. So even, for example, with this apartment building, I've been told that it would drop from 21 months for a stick-built apartment building down to like 14 to 16 months. So, just I think that this is a good timeline, even if we do decide to do modular. Yes, Tani?
Just for people watching, Caitlin, and because I get confused, can you do just a quick explanation of what the difference between modular and manufactured versus stick built is? And then on the diagram, will you just clarify where they say stacked duplexes, that in each unit, there are 4 dwellings? Because I think that's a little confusing.
Yes, I can clarify that. So first, the difference in building types. Modular and manufactured, I'm going to put in one bubble, and then site built, I'm going to put in one bubble. Site built or stick built means that it's constructed totally on site. So you're bringing in lumber, building everything from the foundation up on the site. And then modular and manufactured are both built in a factory and then shipped in and put on a foundation. The difference between modular and manufactured is first of all, they're built to different building standards. So manufactured is built to the HUD code, and modular is built to the IRC, or the International Residential Code. Manufactured home is built basically so it is on metal stilts, and it's movable over time. So, someone can bring in a manufactured unit and keep them there, and then eventually move them to another site. There's a whole other element with financing with that. But just the difference versus a modular unit is very much like a traditional house. It's just built in a factory, and then it's brought on site and it's permanently attached to a foundation. So the difference between a modular unit and a stick-built unit is where they're built, versus modular versus manufactured. It's whether it's permanently on the site or not. And then for both the stacked duplexes and for these, and I'll just pull up this master plan because it's a little bit easier to show both, but so for the stacked duplexes and then the stacked 3 beds, where we don't have as much of a vision for this, but I can tell you for sure based on the bid from IndieDwell, the stacked duplex in each building, it's the same 2-bedroom units stacked on top of each other. So in this one building is 2 units. So, this is 8 stacked duplexes right here. So this is 16 units. And then the stacked 3-bedroom, 5 buildings, 10 units. Does that clarify?
Yes, thank you.
You are welcome. Yeah, so, and then I think that's kind of a brief overview of the timeline. And then getting to the really fun, tricky part is the pro forma.
Caitlin, I'm sorry, that one slide back. Can you, one more back? Our time frame, our timeline.
Timeline, yes.
Can you explain the SF and WSSF and then?
Oh yeah, so winter, spring, summer, fall.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so very general timeline, but I think that it is sufficient for going, 5 or 6 years out. So yes, winter, spring, summer, fall. So right now this starts with summer, fall. So we're kind of in this phase right now. Yes, okay. So moving on to the pro forma, and then also, Kaylin, I want to make sure I give time to you. I don't know if that would be better to do it now or kind of go through all of this and then compare the differences.
I'd be inclined for you just to do your thing, and then
Okay.
maybe it'll answer questions that I have, and we can
Perfect.
go from there.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so the pro forma, so this is the cost estimate for all of the, option A and option B. It is the same bottom line cost either way. But the difference is kind of the way that they're broken out by phasing, but it's the same cost overall. It's just kind of the order in which it gets built. So,
Kaylin, do I have this right? Option B ends up with, it's a little different configuration in the end. There's more units in option B. Is that correct?
no, it's the same. So both of the option A and option B end up with this master plan. It's just whether we start here and then build this apartment building and then build out the back half, or whether we move counterclockwise around the site.
Okay.
But it's the same cost, it's the same unit types and number of units. It's just how we move forward with the timeline and bidding and all of that stuff. So
Okay. Thank you.
yeah. So it gives me a little bit more of an idea of how to, plan out all of the logistics, especially with relocating tenants and all of that stuff. So, I can't see everyone, so I want to make sure before we move on, do we have any other questions on timeline and option A versus option B? Okay. All right. So pro forma, so I broke out the site costs. So the reason why these are different is I have received an opinion of probable costs from Chuck to generate a better idea of actually what the site cost would look like for putting in the 8 duplexes. So that includes curb gutter sidewalk and water and sewer for those 8 units. And also doing electrical upgrades for the 8 units. So that's kind of all wrapped up into this site cost. And then it also includes foundations and kind of everything we would need for that phase 1. And so we've worked with our team and I think that's a more solid number. And then this 192.89 is based on the bid from IndieDwell. So these are a better guess about the numbers. And then for phases 2 and 3, so as you can kind of see for site costs for phase 2 and 3, it decreases because we took out the overall infrastructure costs for water, sewer, electrical, and put it down here in this like general infrastructure upgrades category. I don't have an opinion of probable cost for that because we need a better direction of master plan and need to go through the planning process before we can get harder bids on that. But I've gotten confirmation from Barry and Chuck and James Green with Set Engineering and others that this is kind of our best guess about how much the infrastructure is going to cost. And then I talked to Chuck about Walnut Lane upgrades for the road itself, and per the city's road improvements plan, the Walnut Lane is scheduled for a 3-inch overlay. So that's Chuck's best guess on how much that will cost for 700 feet of road improvement. So that's kind of infrastructure costs that we're looking at. And then this 4733 includes foundations and parking and all the other stuff for those units. But again, we're kind of extrapolating. And then this 150 per square foot for the rest of the buildings. I know Kaylin had some comments on that. And This is a number that I have received from Chic and from Courtney with Architectural Squared, who have both kind of told me that for hard costs for just building alone, typically for multifamily right now, it's somewhere between 140 to 180, and it kind of depends on the finishes and that kind of thing. So we put in 150. That might have to increase, as Kaylin pointed out. MABS is more like 165 for hard costs. So I recognize that this could be a little bit low, and it's partially, this is kind of the time for the council to we can increase these numbers, or we can say moving forward as we're starting to bid out other phases of this project, we can say this is our maximum budget, and we can tailor, moving forward, because when we did this IFB, we didn't have a solid budget, but now we do. That's kind of this whole process of figuring out the budget. So we can increase these, or we can kind of cap for moving forward, saying for any of our architectural bids, we're not going to pay more than 150 square feet. So, I know that these numbers are still in flux, but I think that, to give us an idea of moving forward, they're kind of what we're seeing in the construction industry right now, and what all of my partners are telling me. So it's the best I have. Moving forward, so you guys have seen the 15-year bond. This hasn't really changed. I mean, it changed a little bit just with the updates with the infrastructure costs, but I wanted to show you, we've had a few meetings with another sector of Zion's to kind of develop, to get more information about getting a low interest construction loan from them. So I know these are new numbers, so I just wanted to pull these up and zoom in. So we talked with Zion's earlier this week about doing a combined bond, like we've been talking about, a sales tax revenue bond, and then doing a construction loan at a later date. So the plan that we've talked about is doing a bond for the first 2 phases of work. So this number, so first 2 phases, duplexes, and then the apartment building, and then doing all of the infrastructure upgrades with phase 2. So that totals about, $6 million. So we talked about bonding for that, and we would bond for that now as we're kind of going through phase 1. We do have the Wahoo, which we will totally finance phase 1. So that's not an issue, but we would bond for phase 1 and 2, and then we get a construction loan for the remainder, which is about 60% for the rest of the project. So I just got, it was kind of a quick turnaround to pull all of this information together. So I haven't had a lot of time to mess around with this, but as we're looking at it right now, it would be about a 40 to 60 split between those two. The rate, the loan from Zion's would be through their affordable housing sector. And so it would be a blended bond with Zion's Bank and with Intermountain Health's Impact Investing Fund. So they would do a 50-50 split on that bond, and we would get a blended rate of 3%, which is, higher than the bond, but still really good. It would be an amortization schedule of 35 years, but the bond or the loan itself would be for a term of 18 years. So I do want to note that we would have a balloon payment, but because it's a longer amortization period, we do have a smaller annual debt service over time. So I kind of pulled out this table to go from, most of these tables have been
And no prepayment penalty, right? That's what Alex said last time, so that we could make larger payments based on if we have greater rent, right?
Correct. Yes. And with the construction loan, when we're actually constructing, it will be interest payments only. So the actual construction loan principal and interest wouldn't kick in until 2025, because we're assuming based on the timeline that our debt service will just be the bond as we're doing phase 1 and phase 2. And then when we start phase 3 in 2023-ish, that's when we would get the construction loan. And so we would pay interest only. So that's why this jumps up a little bit more. And then in 2025, we would start paying for both at once. And so I didn't have time to put both of the amortization schedules into one, partially because the construction loan I was given is a monthly payment. And so I had a little bit more work to do to kind of like combine those into one. But anyway, so I mean, kind of the long or the short of it is with the construction loan, this project cash flows because of the kind of the way it balances out. The only question is the balloon payment at the end, but as you can see, after 20 years this project will have brought in $3 million. That could be more over time, that could change, but that's kind of what this model is projecting. And so we'll be able to pay off the majority of that, and or refinance it at year 18. But hopefully we'll be able to pay off more of it. So that's kind of the long of the short of it. I know that's a lot of information, Kaylin.
Shall we go ahead and unshare your screen, Caitlin?
Yes.
Actually,
Oh,
so were you showing phase 3 income in years 1 and 2 in that last table?
yes, that is a good point.
So that's why the net was so high in those first few years, because,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, so I can take time to, I'm not going to do it right now, but that is a good point that, this is starting from year 1. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I realize it's evolving. So I just wanted to make sure that that's what I was seeing. And
Yes, that is correct.
okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Is the idea that we would use the Wahoo money that we have in the account to pay for the interest-only payments?
I think the intention with the Wahoo right now, I mean, we could do that. I think our intention right now is that we would use the Wahoo to pay for phase 1, because acquiring the bond is going to take a couple of months. And so we'll be able to use the Wahoo to pay for phase 1 and then kind of reimburse ourselves once we get the bond. And then, we could use the bond to pay off interest payments or something else later, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Okay. So,
Shall we go back to your goals and just go through your list of
yes,
what you need from us?
yes. So first question is which option would council like to proceed with? Option A or option B, in terms of phasing?
Well, not everyone all at once. I am interested to hear from council, but I do want to just quickly say thank you to you, Caitlin, for putting so much work into this, for getting R-Squared together and bringing together a lot of partners to come up with what you're presenting to us tonight. And it feels like a solid plan. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Caitlin, do you want me to manage the calling on people part, or yeah? Okay, Ronnie.
Oh, so I was going to say I read the packet, and thanks for giving that recommendation of option A. And made sense to me. Then I saw Kaylin's email and I realized, I don't have a construction background, and Kaylin has a lot more experience than me. So I guess for me to feel more comfortable, I guess I just I need to feel like his questions get answered. So I guess I'm kind of waiting for some thoughts through the night from him. But thanks for laying out why you thought A looked good.
Mike?
Yeah, Caitlin, I also thought you did a spectacular job. Thank you so much. We used to say in the aerospace business, to fail to plan is to plan to fail. You guys have heard that. So unless there's I'm leaving the details up to you, really, and trusting you. And as long as you're more comfortable with A, then certainly I am. Unless you see some overriding reason why we might consider the other way of going, then A is fine with me.
Tawny?
Yeah, I read through Caitlin's explanation as to why they recommend A, and I agree with Ronnie. It makes sense. And this is only a comment because I've lived in construction zones. I'm wondering if, as a person living in that first phase, would it be less disruptive to do the counterclockwise method? But I don't have a dog in the fight other than I've lived where there's construction. So I'm okay either way. I'd just like to hear a little bit more from everybody else.
Other comments?
Um,
Kaylin?
Sure. So I can so I will reiterate thanks to Caitlin and the team for all the work that's gone into this, getting this far. As Caitlin, I think you're probably aware, and the rest of the council from my communications, I'm working to get comfortable with this, but I'm not there yet because of some of these outstanding questions. And I appreciate the answer to the per square foot cost that you gave in the meeting as well as in the email. I still have a question about I'm still uncertain about the starting market rate rents as well as the rental growth. And these may seem like small differences, but they propagate over time, and we're counting on how this works out over quite a few years to work out. And so some of these starting assumptions are, I think, kind of critical. I also acknowledge that it's early and this will get refined, but I want it to appear to work out at this stage. So I'm wondering if you could just respond to the 2% versus 3% issue that I raised.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's my honest answer is I don't have a strong opinion on 2 versus 3%. I think that 3%, if anything, follows inflation, especially for the middle income and market rate. So, I think that 3% could and would still work. I agree with you questioning the market rate in there. And I think that, we could mess around with it to see if decreasing the market rate, how that would change it. I think that, like the point that you brought up earlier, the year one projections are not, the market rate, we won't start to see for another couple of years. And so, even setting market rate prices now, we don't know exactly what market rate is going to be in the next 5 years. So, I don't think that really answers your question. I think that, I'm happy to adjust the numbers that you put in for market rate. I think are more on point with market right now than the numbers I have in there. So I'm happy to adjust those. But I think it's a really good point that you made earlier about, we won't start to see market rate for another couple of years. So it's hard to know, but I do think that 3% is realistic for market. I don't know if the mayor has any thoughts on that or not, but
I mean, everything depends on everything. So I think where we are in the phase right now, for me, we still have work to do. But like to move forward, like, what our next step is in terms of our, because we're in this pre-planning or pre-construction phase. I feel comfortable with what you have. And I think the only other thing that, I would add, Caitlin, is that we're going to get to a place, I think, where the pro forma is way more detailed than it is right now. I mean, I know that, like, you start with a napkin and then you get to Excel and you put some Excel numbers together. And then at some point you get into construction software and you've got, like, much more detailed information. So I actually feel comfortable with the numbers as they're presented right now.
So thank you for that. In your email, you mentioned that the project is currently about $300 a square foot, including land and infrastructure costs. When I look at the total of 14.7 million and divide it by the total less the storage units, I get 261. And so I'm wondering if that's accurate, and if so, where the other 40.
Yeah, so let me just share my screen really quick, because I did a quick calculation earlier on this. And I think that, so I got that 300 from, so just taking the land cost right now, that's $27 per square foot additional above these two. So the 300 I got from this phase one because we have a better idea of that. And then, total cost, like you said, is more like 160 or 260. If this 249 is the sum of, the 150 building cost plus the 47 for site plus 2489 for general infrastructure upgrades plus the land cost. So I think that somewhere between 250 and 300 is probably what we're looking at right now. I do, we will still have some soft costs on top of that, so I don't think that we'll be too far off what Ben shared with you about maps. But I mean, right now we are kind of in that ballpark of where they're building. So I don't have any numbers for soft costs. I think that, it's too soon to really get good estimates on how much it's going to be for a general contractor and all that stuff. But I do think that these numbers kind of line up with what Ben's saying. And then also I added in my email, I wanted to talk about this as well. I presented numbers for the construction loan from Zions, but I have, mostly because this was such a quick turnaround to get to this meeting. I don't have all of the information about all of the other financing options we have, but I have had conversations in the last couple of months with Olin Walker, and they are really interested in this project. Barry and I have been talking to a potential private business that might be interested in investing in a couple of units for their employees. So I do think that there are other ways to be able to cut down on the overall loans that we'll have to pay. But all I have right now are these two, the bond and the construction loan from Zions, to show you in depth.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Careful not to give our equity away. This is such a great asset for us to, keep, and especially in preservation of very low to extremely low. When we see ourselves in 15 years or 20 years, something I didn't share at our last meeting that I kind of wanted to share tonight is that what an asset we'll have to be able to provide housing, and when you pay things off, then there's always going to be the ongoing maintenance cost, but because it is a city project, there is a deeper level of assurance of affordability long-term. So I think that there's not a value to that in terms of dollars. It's more of a value to that in terms of housing stock that will be preserved. The other thing I wanted to share that is different from the MAPS project is that the Housing Authority had to contract out to do a lot of work, and that site in particular was forested area, with plants and drainage issues, and it was a more comprehensive site than a hardened already developed housing lot. And so I think there are two reasons why our costs may be lower than MAPS, and one is the just that horizontal development is going to be much cheaper for us. But then also when we're looking at development costs, even though we're working with R squared, it's not lost on me that, our engineer is our engineer for the city as well. And, when we go through the building department, that, there's some costs to the city that are costs to the project. There's some dovetail in certain costs that hopefully that'll have some, that'll create an efficiency and cost effectiveness too, and us being our own developer, you know what I mean? Just something I thought about that I thought was worth sharing.
Yeah. I just wanted to provide a little bit more clarity about the comment I made about partnering with other businesses in the community. We're not at all intending on selling or subdividing this project at this point, but I think it could be a really good potential partnership to deed restrict some of these units for businesses in the area for a certain amount of time, because I know that a lot of businesses are having to buy up homes in the Moab area for their employees, especially those in the overnight accommodations area. So, obviously we're not going to be deed restricting all of our assets away to members of the community, but I think it could also be a really good partnership to make sure that employees that work at our businesses can live at Walnut Lane. So, but still very early on in that conversation, but it is a potential that we could consider.
So Caitlin, it seems like the consensus is option A.
Great.
Ronnie?
Well, I mean, I didn't know if anybody else wanted to, Tawny raises the fair question about traffic flow. So can someone obviously I've lived near construction to a fair amount, and so we just know as humans about the impact of that on people, but can someone more familiar with construction than me kind of speak to help me weigh, figure out how heavily to weigh that, I guess. I'm trying to figure out how heavily I need to weigh it.
Caitlin, in describing the difference between site-built and modular, one thing that you didn't mention too is that when you're when you're building a unit in a factory and then you're bringing it and you're kind of fixing it together, it is a much lighter impact on the neighbors. So, with the first phase, it's going to have a lighter impact. I'm not opposed to, stick built versus modular, whichever's, cheap, fast, and good. And so as we're going through and, doing, I'm assuming we would, continue the IFB process, right? Or RFP or whatever the acronym is, if we're getting bids or proposals or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But Ronnie, that is, a thing that I think we'll see a light impact by doing modular for the first phase.
Yeah. Just ask it. I'll let Mike go.
So Caitlin, I was intrigued by your statement that modular housing is more expensive per square foot than stick-built housing, even though it's quicker, which would be a good reason to do it for phases 1 and 2, and I'm fine with that. But I'm just curious. I would have thought that factory-built housing would be cheaper in the long run because you're building it in a factory, where everything's right there at hand. Why is that?
Well, I think it does depend. It especially right now with COVID. I mean, with this specific instance, like lumber prices are going up a lot, so that will really impact site built versus indie dwell, steel frame. So I mean, it just totally depends. Even between the bidders per square foot with the modular bids that we got, there's a full range. So at the end of the day, we don't know a solid answer on that until we get that. I think that the mayor's points about how invasive it is to build modular versus stick build is a really good point. So I want to touch on that. I'm going to share my screen to answer Ronnie and Tani's questions about that. So just to touch a little bit more on phasing. So, there's the circulation right here. So with phase 1, either way, so we have a trailer right here that we'll need to relocate, but we have a lot of options for moving that. And then we'll be able to cut off and kind of make this into a construction site right here. We have the timeline to put in these units, and Indie has said that it would be a month. They bring it in and it would take about a month to set and stitch and all that stuff versus like several months of construction to build it. So it's definitely one benefit. So during this phase, we would cut it off, move circulation in kind of like a P shape around the site. And then this is the other option. And then for this, we kind of switch it. So we'd cut off this portion of the site and then circulation would be reversed. We'd still have to figure out circulation for doing infrastructure, but in terms of building this, that would be the way we would do it. Versus, this would be the same in terms of circulation. Versus, this approach, we kind of, first of all, I mean, one of the biggest challenges with this is we have so many more tenants we'd have to relocate. So that would be a challenge. But similarly, people would have to drive through these first units to get to the construction site back here. There's not really any way around it because there'll be residents on this side, but we'd be able to cut off this portion to kind of, preserve the construction ground for that. But I think Architectural Square did point that out, of either way, since we're starting from the front, we will have some traffic going through, for the phase 3 of this option, since we did the first 2, we will have construction going through both of these. So either way, any way we go, I think that that's going to be really challenging. And if the city and council are open to it, there is potential to access from 200 North. I don't think the neighbors would appreciate that. So I do want to be cognizant of that, but that is an alternative to get around driving through this residential area. Any scenario is going to be kind of challenging, but I do think that kind of brings up a good point about stick built versus modular, which one takes less time on the site, which one's going to be a little less intrusive to neighbors. So that is kind of our second prompting. I know the two kind of go together. But yeah, I wanted to address that in terms of phasing before we kind of move on. But they do kind of go hand in hand in terms of timing and all that stuff.
Thanks, Caitlin. And I'm glad the mayor pointed out that the modular aren't quite as, invasive or intrusive. So that is a good point to consider. And you're right. It's a construction zone, so no matter what happens, it's it'll be a construction zone until it's not. So, and I don't know how you make them pleasant and live in them at the same time. So,
Caitlin, to just be super clear, when we're talking about, relocation, we're talking about build out, some people move in, more is vacated, build because that's been vacated, and then everyone moves in. And so we're not having to come up with additional, like moving people into apartments and then back to site, correct?
I think as much as possible, yes. I think either way with phase one, we'll have to, I mean, hopefully we might be able to just move that trailer somewhere else on the site. I think it is realistic that we might have to find them temporary housing for a few months as this gets built out, but fortunately that's only one family. So I think that's really a potential for phase one, but then phase two, option A versus option B, I think option B will have to potentially find more housing options because we don't have enough of the duplex units to relocate everyone that would have to be moved in phase two. I think we could move around some trailers and move some people into the duplexes. We might have to move around because looking at that phase, let's see. Let me share this again. So looking at so phase two, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So, this is 12 or 13 trailers that are here that would have to be, logistics would have to be figured out. So we'd be able to move a lot of them into the site and move, some of these trailers to other locations on the site. I think
But the apartments are 24 units, right?
Right. Yeah. So with this option A, which it seems like that's a consensus, we wouldn't have to do that because there's 7 trailers, 8 units. We would move everyone in here into one of these units. So the relocation game isn't as much of an issue, which is, I think, why we so heavily prefer this option. Because
and the relocation game is essential for, individuals that are walking, families where kids go to school. So it just seems like relocating within the site is so much more preferable than relocating like into Spanish Valley, for example. And I think that that's what I like most about this phased approach. Yes, it's a longer construction duration, but it keeps people in place. And I think that's really valuable. Ronnie?
Caitlin, thanks for explaining, going back over those differences between modular and manufactured, and thanks for asking that, Tawny. Can you just also address, because I've gotten the question, concerns that modular won't, hold up as well or last as well as stick built, and so, I think there might just be a few people in the community wondering, like, why can't we do all stick built? So if you could just address that question.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think, like, in general, modular construction has really grown a lot. So I think, when it first was rising, that could have been more, there could have been a bigger difference. But I think, when you are building something in the factory, you're able to, you're not prone to weather or anything like that. It's easier to control it, so you can build it exactly how you want it. And, I would also say, they're built to the same building code. So modular is going to hold up just as well in theory as something that's stick built because they should be built to the same code. There is a difference between manufactured and modular because they're built to different codes. So manufactured decreases in value and in quality much faster than modular. But I think that at this point, because the technology is so advanced and all that stuff, there's not that much of a difference between modular and stick built.
Okay, and then just one other question, but I don't know where it fits in tonight's discussion, so I'll just throw it out here. And as we work through your questions, you can answer it where you see fit. But I think another question I got was, especially with us building apartment buildings, is there the opportunity, or has there been thought, I know you're on the housing task force with HOSI members, about partnership with HOSI, or especially out of their lessons learned, or maybe replicating the model from the maps for the apartments? Or just fit that in wherever it fits in.
Yeah, I think that there's potential. It's not the vision right now to use LIHTC for this project. I think we would have had to start having those conversations a long time ago. So we couldn't fully replicate it, but I have a really great working relationship with Ben and Jenna, and have already reached out to Ben many times to ask for advice about this project. So I think there's definitely a lot of potential for lessons learned. I definitely need the mentorship. So, I mean, it kind of depends on, as we're starting to get into more specific building design, if the council prefers the look and feel of maps, we definitely could use that same architecture firm. But I think that will be decided at a later date. That has been something that we've talked about as well, in terms of, if we do this modular in the first phase, what's the rest of it going to look like? And, ultimately, whether we do steel frame modular right now, and then we do some stick built, and then we do other different modular, and then we do a different kind of stick built, the thing that's going to pull it all together is kind of like landscaping, community design, and materiality and color palettes and all of that stuff. But I think that that's something that we'll figure out later.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, didn't mean to go on a tangent. Didn't know where that fit in.
Yeah.
So what else do you need from us? What was the second goal? I looked for the document, and then I think I closed it. What else do you need from us, Caitlin?
So modular versus site built, general opinions. I think mostly we've heard from Caitlin on this, so I'd be interested to hear others. Obviously we're recommending modular for this first phase in response to the IFB. So trying to get a better sense from the council generally about how they feel about doing site built like how much do you want to prioritize site built versus modular? So in my recommendation, I kind of stated that I think that it would make sense to do modular for the first two phases because it'll take less time, and then we can do stick built on the second half. I think there's also potential to do site built for everything other than phase one. We could do all modular, just trying to get a better direction of, as we're starting to go out to bid for later phases, how should I be tailoring those?
Well, Caitlin, let me respond first in saying that we can in general say, it's probably safe for us to say today, if we know we're moving forward with modular, when we get to the place when we're going to publish the RFP or IBD or whatever, then at that point we'll have learned a few things about working with IndieDwell and the modular business in general. And so we might be better informed as long as the council feels okay with, convening again to kind of polish the request that goes out, then I don't know that we totally have to answer that as long as we're kind of on the same page about that. Ronnie?
I like knowing we have flexibility. I'll just pass on, one comment I got from a resident, which was like, well, it seems like more money would be spent locally, if we site built and get materials here. So, but I'll leave that up to you who with more building experience. But it's nice to know it's great if we have flexibility to learn as we go.
Yes.
And,
I think,
and that could actually be reflected in the proposal too, that we're open to either either typology. Sorry, Tawny.
no, that's okay. I think, I think in this first phase that time is of the essence. I mean, if we've got trailers that are failing, we do owe it to the people that are currently living there to do this as quickly as possible. And I agree with Emily. I think it's we've got time to tailor the phasing of the project to what we experience. And if we end up thinking that Indie Dwell is really cool and they're doing a really good job, we can do it modular the whole way through. And if we're married to stick built, that's okay too. But I think in this first phase it makes sense. And then to make it aesthetically pleasing, you want it to have some continuum and look like it was built together. So I think it makes sense to do the one side all the same.
Well, that feels pretty. Does anybody, do any council members disagree or have additional comments around that?
I personally kind of like the diversity argument. Otherwise it's going to look like Russian built housing for the masses or Chinese, whatever. I mean, you may find that whatever you build, I like the diversity idea because you may find something that works a lot better. I didn't turn on my video. Sorry about that. Anyway, so I'm not necessarily hung up on having it all look the same.
Karen?
I was just going to say that the commodity sector in softwood lumber right now is astronomical. And so, I mean, especially, what's happening with COVID. I mean, if we do modular now, potentially in the phase 3 and things sort of calm down and we can see what, those prices are, I think that's an important aspect to keep in mind.
Kaylin?
Buildings have many ingredients and components. The lumber is a small part of that. Labor is huge. So just basing our expectations on lumber prices in the last few months is not, I don't think, the way to make decisions about how we move forward. So I realize that I'm diverging, but I feel like I shouldn't acquiesce through silence. So I am not comfortable with the pro formas as they are and the assumptions that are inherent. I feel like the Indie Dwell bid is really expensive and it doesn't demonstrate fiscal responsibility either to our citizens or potentially to future lending partners. It also locks in costs that then we'll have to overcome with future phases of the project. So I've been working to try to get past this, but I'm not there yet. So sorry about that.
Caitlin or Joel, do you want to respond to that?
I don't I mean, as is shown in the IFB results that we've presented before, I do agree that Indie Dwell is the highest per square foot cost. It's definitely true. And so I really appreciate the council's comments about wanting flexibility. I think that the committee decided that Indie Dwell was the best bid for this IFB. So I guess that is another question that we will be walking into is how would council like to proceed with the results of the IFB, because Kaylin suggested before to do manufactured units. So that is also an option. And like I said at the beginning, that would still go in the same spot. We'd still look at the same number. But generally, I mean, I really appreciate the comments, and even as we were walking into the conversation about this question, I had just said that we'll decide aesthetics and all that stuff later. I think it's totally fair that we also decide modular versus stick built later. And the priority right now is kind of figuring out how to proceed with the site plan. I feel as though I have given as much information I can about the pro forma and the site plan and everything. And in talking to all of the lenders we've been talking to, they all seem comfortable with it and are interested in our project. And I don't know how else more specifically, we can have more conversations on offline about all of this. But it's hard for me to know what specific information to bring to make you a little bit more comfortable with this. I don't know.
Right. And I realize that I'm a minority opinion, it appears, and so I don't necessarily have to be comfortable if the rest of the council feels otherwise.
I'm gonna share something that might help with comfort level. Caitlin, you made a good point, and it's probably worth repeating. So when you're like a new, you're in your 20s and you're like, it's time for me to buy a house, and then you go to the bank and you don't know anything, and then you say to the lender across the table, like, hey, I want to buy this house that's really cool. Will you give me the money? And then what the lender does is takes your income information and looks at all your details, how much you're paying for a car payment and student loan payment, and then gives you a debt to income ratio and says whether or not you can afford the monthly payment for the house, right? I think it's worth it to say we are a very complicated family here, getting a very complicated loan for a very complicated dwelling, and Zions Bank knows our finances very intimately and is providing us with what seems to be a pre-approval and terms, and I do find comfort in that, and maybe that can be somewhat comforting because they're also looking at the pro forma too, and they're the ones that are putting their neck out. Like, yes, we're putting our neck out in borrowing money, but they're putting their neck out as the lender. They're not going to loan to us if we're just loosey-goosey.
But the basis for the bonding is our sales tax, right? That's our base income. That's what's guaranteeing it.
Well, that's what's guaranteeing, but it's not base. They're still looking at our what would be like the income statement, the pro forma, right, Caitlin? Like Alex looked into that and was looking at the rents we were going to be receiving, the maintenance costs, the overall project costs. Is that true? Can you speak to that maybe?
Yeah, that's true. We have talked a lot about the pro forma with Alex, myself, Joel, and Clint. So we've talked through that. We've talked through all the scenarios that we talked about last week: market rate, manufactured, blah blah. So that is how, obviously, sales tax is how we assure the bond, but they know that this is how we'll repay it. And then in terms of the construction loan, we'll get that in a later phase. And so the pro forma and all that stuff is more important for the construction loan. And since we will already have assets on the site, that is the reassurance for that construction loan. But either way, because this is a cash flowing project, that's a big reason why Zions Bank has been so supportive of it.
Let me throw this out, kids, that I like Emily's observation that the city is going to be proud owner of some very nice equity in a very nice part of town. And if we can just get past all the next few years, which are sure to involve more expenses than we imagined, and all these little shortcomings may come out and bite us in the butt, but still, once we manage to get through all this and we can get relatively low interest loans because we're a municipal entity, I think we'll make it all the way through it. And we can always decide how much, where to set prices and for the best mix of affordability and market rate. And in other words, what I'm trying to say is let's charge on here, kids. I mean, that's my opinion. I think we're going to have a very nice housing development. So I don't want to see us stop now.
Karen? Mute.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, Kaylin's use of the Stratton homes, I mean, in that first phase was just those 8 units, it's almost $500,000 in savings. Is that about right, Kaylin? 480 or, and I'm just curious if it would be worth like us to do a comparison of like what that Stratton homes look like compared to the indie dwell. I mean, I don't know that it's so bad to try to save some money off the bat. We've got to get through this first phase. Like we've got to help get these, dilapidated trailers off, people in, and then move forward. So, I mean, I don't think we're much different. I mean, I really appreciate what Kaylin's gone through and looked at, because I mean, we are all responsible for what we're doing, to our community. So I don't know if that's an option, Caitlin.
Yes. So, and I don't know, I was just about to pull up the final bid from Stratton Homes just to show you, pull up some of that information about the 2 bids. Because that is a really good point. I mean, manufactured units are going to be a lot cheaper, both in infrastructure costs, we won't have to pour a foundation, and also in per unit cost than modular. One of the big questions along this whole process has been with the manufactured units, and especially now with the Stratton homes. If we proceed with that route, will we keep the manufactured units on the site permanently, or will we replace them? And I know the mayor used to push on this point a lot when we first started talking about this request for bids. At some point we will, if the council wants to replace those manufactured units, we're going to have to pay the same amount of money later. We will be able to recoup some of the costs if we do manufactured, because we'll be able to sell them. And they can go into another manufactured home park in the Moab area, which I think is hugely needed, because Walnut Lane is not the only trailer park that looks like it does. So that's, pro and con with that. But, as we're talking about modular and manufactured, that is a good question of, does the council intend on kind of, doing manufactured at the beginning, building out the rest of the site? Will those manufactured units stay there, or will they be replaced at a later date? And how does that impact the pro forma? But I'm happy to, I think that Stratton Homes, if we go the manufactured route, I believe they scored really well. They have Energy Star upgrades. They're better insulated than the standard. They're all electric. So as far as manufactured units go, I think it's a great bid. But I mean, that is kind of the next and final question that I wanted to discuss tonight is which route council would like to proceed, if either, for the IFB. So would it be helpful for me to pull up the bid information to show you what those units look like? How would you like to facilitate that? I'm getting head nods, so I'm going to pull that up. Okay. Let me. Okay. So, so this is Stratton Homes bid. So all of these are kind of long and skinny units. Oop. So this is the 1-bedroom unit, 533 square feet, living room, bedroom, bath. So kind of basic small unit. And they're all kind of this, all of the unit options are kind of this shotgun long and skinny versus indie dwell is more square. So This is the 1 bed, 1 bath option. And then and then with this next one, it shows the 2 and the 3. So for the 2-bedroom option for Stratton Homes is this bottom one down here. So it's the same unit size for both, but the 2-bedroom has the dining area in the bedroom, living room, 2nd bedroom versus the 3-bedroom. The 2 bedrooms are kind of a little bit smaller, and the living room's a little bit smaller. So bedroom, all of the bedroom units are a little bit smaller. It's the same size, but same overall size of units. So especially with the 2-bedroom, the per square foot cost is substantially less. And for size comparison, so 2-bedroom would be 880 square feet versus the Indie Dwell, pulling that up. So with these, we're looking at 672 square feet. So entrance here. So these are more like squares versus Stratton Homes are long and narrow. So either way, even though these are stacked, we have figured out I think we would be able to fit somewhere between 6 and 8 manufactured homes in that same spot as phase 1.
How is that possible? How is that possible? That doesn't make sense to me. In looking at the site plan, it doesn't make sense that we would be able to fit 6 to 8 Stratton homes in the same footprint.
So they would be they're a pretty similar size to, these manufactured homes. So they would be long and skinny shotguns.
Except for we wouldn't be stacking. So we would only be
Right.
one per space for, the ground level. So
Yeah, so I think it would be more like we'd probably be able to fit in 6 up until this trailer up here. So it'd be 6 units in here. So the duplexes definitely are higher density. But the
I don't know how you would fit 6, Caitlin. I'm just going back. If you look at the way that it's spaced out right now, and you look to the left, you've got 4 units spaced. The reason why they're spaced in that way is because 2 reasons. There are setback requirements, but there's also that's where they park. But what are the setbacks required for manufactured units being put together? And then I just want everyone to think about the intersection of Spanish Valley Drive and Mill Creek Drive, where we saw a very similar looking development. And I've often wondered, gosh, did they maximize their square footage by just replacing units with units as opposed to a higher density development where you're stacking units?
I don't think that's the kind of project we're looking to.
Yeah, I feel anxious in this conversation right now, actually.
I agree.
Yeah.
Can I just ask the council really quickly, is anybody else feeling like we want to continue this discussion?
I don't.
I do. I view this as a temporary solution to a somewhat emergency situation. And not permanent, but one that controls costs and will provide much better housing than what is there.
And I think we should give Caitlin just a minute to maybe answer the questions that were presented.
And I do one really quick thing, Caitlin. I mean, looking at this, there are 6 units here right now, or there were. We have removed a lot of them, but this is units 1 through we would, replace up to unit 7. So that is what's on the site right now. I know that the site plan doesn't really reflect that. And driving out there, it's hard to get that scale, but when we purchased it, there were 6 units right there. So I think they would fit in there again.
The site plan for the Walnut Lane Apartments proposal, the final unit, the 8 units would fit within that, what is the rear property line of the neighbor. The layout of the 6 looks like it goes far beyond that property line. It looks to me like you get double the density with the stack units. It looks more like there would be 4. That's what's there right now, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're getting double the density if we're really comparing apples to apples. Because also with the length of the 2-bedroom, the 3-bedroom, it compromises the parking that's proposed as well in front of the units. So I'm really actually not sure that
Yeah. I mean, we would extend, it is a fair point. I think that we would extend the units to go rather to this property line to go a little bit beyond, which, would feed a little bit into where the stack duplex is, but I think that we could still shift all of these up a little bit. So I think there is room. It would be tight, but technically I think there is room. So
Caitlin, are you concerned about a depreciation?
Me or Kaylin?
Kaylin, sorry. Kaylin, are you worried about depreciation?
I am, but so I think this option might require more analysis. I just looked it up in R4. They need to be spaced 10 feet apart, and there's other dimensional requirements having to do with setbacks from public roads and property lines, but that's the basic spacing from each other that's required. It seems like in many mobile home parks, they are placed on the diagonal to aid in their insertion and removal. And so that would also free up some road space on that access drive. But again, that's not design work that we should be doing on the fly, I don't think, if we wanted to go this route. I suspect that even with depreciation, that if they got replaced in the future and resold, that the net cost may still be less than the IndieDwell units, because the IndieDwell are so expensive. But again, I'm shooting from the hip. And, I look at these and it's like, oh, this is not my vision. Like I would think that I would totally support replacing them in the future, but I also am cognizant that the IndieDwell is locking in a really high cost. And I lived in something very much like the 3-bedroom that I remodeled to be like the 2-bedroom unit for 12 years. And when I look at the IndieDwell unit, it looks really tight. So even though a single wide isn't that attractive from the outside, that the great room, if you will, has windows on both sides, and there's actually more space for the occupants. It has a bath for each bedroom. I think in some ways it may offer a better living experience. And I understand the resistance to this. I mean, initially I was resistant too until I started looking at the economics of it. So I'm not arguing strongly for this, but I'm just trying to find the best solution for the situation.
Caitlin, if the phase 1 stuff went in starting in spring through the summer, if you substituted stick build on site for the IndieDwells and they were cheaper, that would alleviate part of Caitlin's concern. And the extra delay in getting them built, if it's during the summertime, maybe it's not so objectionable. Would that be a possibility?
I don't think it's a possibility to get stick built. partially we will have to go back out to bid. One of the benefits of modular is they have, since they're building in the factory, they have the plans kind of pre-packaged. So I think the process for like if we wanted to do stick built with phase one, we're not going to see units out there for another year. So I don't know that that's a realistic option. One question I do have though is, Indie Dwell isn't the only modular bid we received, and so I'm wondering, especially to Kaylin, but to the group, are there other modular bids that you prefer over Indie Dwell? Because that's also an option.
Right, because the other company had a more spacious layout.
Right.
And it's what are they called? Not what's it called?
So we have two. So we have module, which is what you're
Module.
thinking of, and modules 2-bed. The units themselves are a little more expensive, but per square foot are, very affordable. So their 2-bed is a townhome style, 2-story. I think it's like 1,100 square feet for a 2-bedroom. Or there's also Irontown is the other modular. And they had a range of unit types, but their units in general are a little bit more of the shotgun kind of shape. Single story, I think around 600 or 700 square feet. It's been a couple weeks since I looked at the other bids to know exactly the square foot on that, but I can pull that up.
Well, but the committee did a rating and ranking and looked at the different modular proposals and settled with Indie Dwell. And that committee was like Chuck and who else?
Me, Barry, Corey, you, Joel and Carly and Nora on the periphery, and Clint. So yeah, I mean that was the recommendation, but per city's code, Lori and I have had a lot of conversations about how the bid award can go. But ultimately it is council's decision about how to award the bid, how to proceed with bids that we've received for this amount. And so the council doesn't have to go, that is our recommendation. Ultimately, you don't have to go with that because you are in control of the bids. You could also request more information, as happened a few weeks ago, which has prompted these conversations, which have been really good. So yeah, I mean that is our recommendation. That's how we've kind of, that's how I've morphed all of the timeline and the site plans and the pro formas and all that stuff is around the Indie Dwell bid. So it would be, taking a lot of time to rework that if you wanted a different scenario, because the numbers and shapes and all that stuff are going to be different if you went with a different bid, but it still is an option if others are not feeling as vocal but are also not comfortable with Indie Dwell. But yeah.
So council, let's see. Caitlin needs direction from us. And I just kind of feel like we had this conversation already. So, but I do appreciate Caitlin, taking us through the mental exercise, because it is a less expensive option to just, replace what we've got and not redevelop the area. So, and if you're saying they're only the requirement is only 10 feet between, then maybe we could sardine them in and have a higher density. I just
one thing you need to remember is if if that's the option we choose, and we do choose at some point down the road to sell those units and either go with a stick-built, finish out that development, either stick-built or with modulars, those costs are going to increase over time. So even if we save a little bit going one way and we make decisions down the road, that it might be a wash, if just depending on how construction costs go down the road.
It's probably worth it to have this conversation too. Like when we think about homes that go up for sale in our neighborhoods in Moab, and we're like, what? That 2-bedroom, 1-bath home just sold for $300,000. What the heck? That's because it's a stick built on a permanent foundation, and you just don't have that value. It's a different asset. But if I would say, Kaylin, I like that you're taking us through this because this is important. But I would say if we couldn't afford it, if we couldn't get the financing for it, then maybe I would be, more inclined to dig deeper. But we do have the proposal for the financing. So what do you think about that?
I think that this goes back to a conversation that the council had earlier, which is how much of our financing do we want to use on the Walnut Lane project versus the other needs the city has. And if we want to prioritize Walnut Lane, that's fine. But I am aware that there's competing needs, and ultimately this probably will cash flow, and the bond will be paid off, and that money can then be reborrowed and for other projects. But my understanding is that in the meantime, we're locking up some of our bonding potential.
Yeah, but Alex also mentioned that we're still nowhere near full bondability of our bonding based on sales tax. That there's still plenty of capacity for borrowing.
Presumably, we're comfortable going the full distance, but we've been cautioned about that as well, about overcommitting.
I find it interesting that a week ago or whatever it was, I suggested doing exactly this, and you guys all turned it down, saying you wanted to do it the right way. And now you've got me sold on it, and I kind of like the idea. So I've changed positions too. So sorry about that.
Oh, I'm just concerned about I think part of the challenge is that the existing conditions that we're dealing with. If we had a blank slate and we could just build it out in 1 or 2 phases as stick built, it would be much easier. I feel like the existing conditions are making this a lot more challenging.
I totally agree. And I don't know if you guys remember my position when we first started the conversation about the IFB. When we first started this, I mean, on staff side, we were all kind of saying we just got to buy manufactured units. And a lot of us on staff going through this process, we've gone through this same kind of changing of minds. It's so hard. I mean, it feels like the easiest solution is to go with manufactured, and the more you think about, replacing it and all this stuff that we've been talking about, it's like it's so hard to know the pros and cons. So I do want to note that I definitely sympathize with you, Kaylin. I have been thinking through that a lot as well. And so, that was kind of the solution that I wanted to go with for a really long time as well. So
if there was an easy right answer, we'd have just brought you that one to start with.
Well, one thing I like about the manufactured housing is if we leave open, as Tony said, the option of replacing it with modular stick-built homes a few years down the road, and we see how things are going. That's a great thing. And again, this is the poorest people in town that we're building for here. And I think that they'll be pleased as punch to get new trailers, even though we all say we'd really like to do better than that. So there's something to be said for that approach. And yet I hate to torpedo all of Caitlin's work here, which is great. So I don't know. I kind of feel like I'm going to go hide in a corner and let you guys decide.
Karen?
This is just really an opportunity for the city to do a stellar project and to show what higher density can look like, what a project that could be viable, that's downtown. Yeah, I mean, after looking at the examples, I really do feel like let's move forward and let's go with the modular stackable that is gonna. I think it's going to be more complementary to what we do in the phase 2 and phase 3.
And
so that's a proposal to move forward with that. Do we want to straw poll that proposal? Because it's not really a vote, it's just direction.
I agree with you, Karen. I think it's an opportunity for us to do a really good project and maybe, use a little bit more progressive construction methods and some forward thinking about how people live in a little smaller spaces, and that it can work. And I mean, that's in essence why we spent so much time on the pad. And I realize we're going to have to make a few adjustments to that. But that's what we've been talking about for longer than any of us have been on the council, is creating spaces that are nice for people to live in, even if they're small, but they're walkable. And I think we probably just need to bite the bullet and do it.
So we've got the bite the bullet or keep thinking about it in front of us. It feels like, because what you're saying, Caitlin, is going to take, more time and more work.
Yeah. So Ronnie, what do you think about it? Karen and Atani weighed in. How about you?
Yeah. I would feel better if Caitlin felt better. I think I'm ready to bite it. I just hope that years from now, the councils that follow us are not cursing our names because they're trying to find a way to pay. But I do feel like let's give it a try.
Okay, well, fortunately, I'm cool with either way, but I think there's a lot of flexibility in either option. So right now, Emily, you got a majority of the council right now. How do you feel about it, Emily? What do you think?
Well, I support Sal's recommendation, but I guess I don't vote. I actually support moving forward with what Caitlin proposed, but I also really appreciate Caitlin's all the points that you brought up and the fiscal implication of this decision. I think that's a really important conversation for us to have right now. And yet I do support, moving forward with what staff is recommending. And it's not me, it's Caitlin. It's 7:40 and it feels like we've, had a really good conversation around this. And it feels like there's momentum that staff can move forward with. Does anybody have any? Caitlin, do you want to ask some final clarifying questions, or does anyone want to share anything more?
Sure. I
Might tweet
mean,
it.
I'd love to hear other thoughts from council or from Joel or Carly or Lori but I mean, so what I'm hearing is, so first I want to touch on, the fiscal impacts are huge, and I've spent so much time thinking through that. And I know that this is a really hard decision. And I think that that's why it's really important that we finally have a budget for this project, and moving forward for all the other bids, we can say, our max per square foot is 150. If you can't hit that, then we're going on to the next bid. I also think that the nature of how we went about this IFB, focusing first on manufactured, kind of limited the pool of modular bidders that we got. And so, I think for future phases, we'll have different options. So that is really exciting to look forward to. But, we've noodled on this so much, and especially about the financing and all that stuff. And so I do feel a lot more confident than I did, even 2 or 3 weeks ago. And it's just constantly evolving. So I do want to touch on that. But what I'm hearing, and I want to get this clarified, especially because I'm going to have to do it after we end this meeting tonight to get it to summer. But what I'm hearing is that I would prepare an item for Tuesday for council to take action on awarding a bid. So I want to confirm that. Okay.
That and moving forward with direction to proceed with the proposal that's presented.
Great. Okay.
All right, final thoughts.
Going
Going once.
President.
What's that?
I need to go see if we have a president.
Oh, I thought you said we had one, and then I thought, oh my gosh.
Not till tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock at the earliest.
Okay, well, I'm really grateful to staff, and I'm really grateful to council for coming together on a Wednesday evening, having this tough conversation. Kaylin, you've got work to do to get stuff together. I just want to set an expectation for the packet, because it's Wednesday and tomorrow is packet. I mean, yes, really, packet due date's passed. So hopefully this meeting can, inform the materials for the packet, and we're otherwise just creating an agenda summary and a suggested motion for the meeting Tuesday.
And we can reference in the agenda summary of this meeting, so as people get the packet, they know to go reference this meeting for a lot of the information that we're discussing.
Yeah, we could just, should we republish all the materials that were, and then the follow-up materials that you shared for the Tuesday meeting? Caitlin?
Sure. Yeah, I can. I guess one question for, I guess, is maybe a Lori question. Do I need the actual contract in the packet, or I guess this is similar to Architectural Squared. It's just awarding the bid, and then we'll do contract negotiations.
You can do it that way, given the time. You could award the bid, and then we can work on that contract, and then we can bring the contract back as quickly as possible.
Yeah, okay. Let's talk about this offline. We want to do a notice to proceed and an award letter and everything.
Perfect. Okay.
Awesome. All right. Unless there's any other last minute shares, I would accept a motion to adjourn.
I so move. Thank you to all of you, particularly Kate and Emily, so everybody.
So I will take the motion from Mike and the second from?
Second.
Kaylin. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 We are adjourned. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to go eat pumpkin pie. Bye.